In 1969, I was in a summer camp, and we didn't have, when we first landed on the moon, we didn't have TV then. It was a tough summer camp. We had radio though. We listened to it on the radio, and I remember when we first landed on the moon, and I was I was almost 13 at the time, and just 5 days before my 13th birthday, I believe. And ever since then, I thought about maybe becoming an astronaut, but never really thought seriously about it until after I'd finished, ended up going to college at the Naval Academy, graduated in '79, and then I was a navigator in the Navy. You don't have to be a pilot, you don't have to be in the military to become an astronaut. I was a navigator. I went to Navy test pilot school as a navigator, so they need to change the name at some point, but again, it's test pilots, they kind of name it what they want. But so it's not only test pilots that go through test pilot school, but also flight test engineers and flight test officers, basically, is what I was. Started applying in 1984 and was accepted in 1990. So it took me 4 tries, and 6 years to finally get accepted. I usually tell people that I applied so many times that they got tired and they said, well, if we accept him, he won't apply anymore and we don't have to deal with him. So, but that's just, as many of you all know, it's just persistence. Keep trying, because usually the first answer will be no in any time you ask. I know parents don't like me to remind kids about that they'll just keep asking, but just set your sights and keep moving. So I was in the class in 1990, ended up flying 4 times. The pictures I'll show you here today are from my last mission, my 4th mission. So I flew the space shuttle missions. Almost all my missions were on Endeavour except for my first one, which is on the Discovery. If anybody gets a chance to see one of the space shuttles, you may have already seen it. In DC area, Discovery is there. The space shuttle Atlantis is in Florida. And then the Endeavour is in California, at the California Science Center, right near USC in LA. So I'll be talking about this, and as far as the basket background, give you a little bit of idea. So it was like I believe it was in the mid-90s. So my mom never bought a light ship basket here because, as some people had called them, she always, as my grandmother called them, she called them Nantucket minks. She thought they were too expensive. My mom, always being very practical, never got one. So I decided, well, I think I'm going to make her a basket. So my siblings always give me a hard time. Yeah, kissing up to mom again, whatever. So I made her one in the mid-90s, and then once I started training for space station in like 97 or so, we started traveling a lot to Russia. The way it works is that, so International Space Station, I'll talk a little bit more now, is an international program. I'm a big believer in international programs because there's a lot of benefits you get from international programs. Our major partner right now in International Space Station is Russia. Many of you know that our relationship with Russia is probably at an all-time low right now, but people forget we're still flying in space together. We're still relying on the Russians to get to space. Hopefully in the near future that dependency will end, because we'll either SpaceX or a NASA with Orion or a Boeing with their CST-100 capsule will be launching once again from US soil. But what happens is that in these international partnerships is that people forget about the politics and you just focus on the mission, and you want to do the mission safely. And so you're able to work together when you find a common goal, and that right now that's flying in space. So before I went, they said on space, space shuttle mission is like a sprint. A space station mission is like a marathon. So where my mission was about 6.5 months in space. There were astronauts that just returned recently. One of the 3 is female, and she spent 204 days. I only spent 196 days up there. But that length of time, to put it in perspective, if you could imagine going on a family trip in a Winnebago and never getting out for 6.5 months. That's what it's like. And so you can imagine, you know, we never fought up there. We got along all the time, never had any arguments. I'm just joking, really, but, you know, seriously, I mean, that gives you an idea of living in a confined space, of the challenges of that. So knowing that, they gave us the option of, this is the indicator that I'm talking too long. Knowing that is that you have to find time to relax. So a space shuttle mission, if it's 7 to 10 days long, it's kind of like finals week. You can gut it out. You can go through with maybe only 4 to 6 hours of sleep a night, and you can gut it out for that length of time. But for a space station mission, it's more like a marathon, and you have to have ways to relax and have your own free time to do things. So once I started training in Russia, the deal is that if it's Russian hardware, the Russians have to certify you and train you in that. So I spent through about 4 years, I spent about half that time in Russia. Training outside of Moscow in a town called Star City. In Russian, it's Zvyozny Gorodok. Я говорю по-русски. I had to learn Russian, even though the official language on the International Space Station is English. We had a Russian commander, was Yuri Onufrienko. His name is spelled in Cyrillic letters up there. Carl Waltz on the left, yours truly on the right. This was our crew, an all-male crew. The last class that was selected a couple years ago, there were 12 astronauts selected. I think they had something like 30,000 applicants or something like that. They selected 12. Half of those were female, so NASA's starting to get it right. We were Expedition 4 to the International Space Station. Now I think they're up to Expedition 59 or 60, so that dates me a little bit. So we were early on in the building of Space Station, and that happened to be the crew. So launching in the space shuttle is kind of like, I say it's like launching off an aircraft carrier. So my background was a naval flight officer, a navigator, and an A6 intruder, where I sat on the right side. They don't fly those airplanes anymore. Everything I've ever flown is in a museum now, except Space Station. I don't think Space Station will ever end up in a museum. It's just too big. It may end up in a flying museum, maybe higher. But so launching off an aircraft carrier, we go from 0 to 150 miles an hour in about 2.5 seconds. In the space shuttle, we go from 0 to 17,500 miles an hour in 8.5 minutes. And the acceleration you get at first feels like a catapult launch off the aircraft carrier when you have a lot of wind over the deck of the ship's going very fast, and you're not very heavily loaded. So this doesn't happen to be one of my launches. This is HD video. They did not have HD video when I flew, so just for the quality. So this happens to be Atlantis. I wasn't on Atlantis, but this launch is very similar to ones that I had.
11, 10, 9, 8. Go for main engine start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2.
So on a couple of my missions, it stopped here. You might be able to see the tail swing, but because the shuttle main engines, they're being fueled by, I'll show you later in a picture, but they're being, the fuel and oxidizer is liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen that's in that big brown tank. And then they feed, there's pipes basically that go into the shuttle and feed these main engines. And because these engines are off axis, because all of this, the 4.5 million pounds, is held to the launch pad with 8 bolts. Each bolt is about this big around, and there's 4 on each solid rocket booster. So when you have this off-axis thrust, the shuttle actually bends about a foot at the tip. And so we call it the twang, but it actually bends a little bit. But if your engine's shut down at this point, then the shuttle just continues to rock a little bit there on the launch pad. And everybody's sitting inside, and we have a lot of bells and whistles, and the ground's talking to us, and we know that something went wrong. And if we need to get out of the shuttle in a hurry, we can do that. But it's not a good day if the engine shut down.
51.6 degree, 136.
So there's a camera on the outside, and as you look at the video, look at how much vibration there is. All this vibration we feel inside too, so there's a lot of vibration inside the shuttle. We depend on mission control, even though we see all of our instruments. Mission control gets telemetry, and they can alert us to any problems that they see or anything like that. So it's, even though there's only 5 to 7 of us in the space shuttle at the time, and we do work as a crew on the flight deck. There's mainly 4 people there that are working together, but we rely a lot upon the ground to give us information as we go up.
36 statute mile orbit.
The trajectory, when we go up, it looks like we're almost going vertical at first, and then we have to kind of head towards the horizon, because when we're in orbit, we need the speed going this way, and we need that 17,000 miles an hour parallel to the surface of the Earth. We don't want to go just straight up. So the trajectory is to get you out of the thickest part of the atmosphere as soon as possible, but at the same time we're kind of arcing towards the horizon, because eventually that's where we want the velocity. And a lot of times when we're in orbit, people say, oh, it's zero gravity, or they'll say microgravity, but really we're falling to the Earth. Once we get that speed, we're falling to the Earth every second, but we're going so quickly this way, so fast this way, we never get any closer. Inside, it's very comfortable. The hardest part about launch is that you get in the spaceship normally about 4 hours before launch, and you wait. You know, it's a government, hurry up and wait. Okay, so that was just probably, I don't know, maybe 15 seconds after launch. Again, a lot of vibration inside, and that's why we do depend upon the ground to communicate, tell us if anything is going wrong. Shortly after launch, we could look, now this is zoomed in, where we orbit is 200 miles above the Earth, which to put it to scale, if you have a drinking glass, the inside of the rim would be where the Earth is, and the outside of the rim would be where we orbit. So if the Earth's diameter is about 7,000 miles, we only orbit about 200 miles above the Earth. So you don't have to get very far above the Earth to get out of the atmosphere, and we have to get out of 99.99% of the atmosphere in order to keep that, maintain that velocity. So there's where our flight started here at pad 39B here, and this was at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. We orbit around the Earth once every 90 minutes. We're in orbit, essentially our orbit does precess a little bit, but essentially if you think of that, we're in a steady orbit and the Earth is rotating underneath us, so our view constantly changes. We have about 45 minutes in daylight, 45 minutes in darkness, and then the views are that's like the most favorite thing to do when we're up there, is to look out the window, because the view just keeps changing when you're up there. And this happens to be, I don't even know if this is a sunrise or a sunset, I just forget, but every 45 minutes you see something like this. They allowed us, before we flew, they said, okay, for a hobby, before you go up there, you can bring a package about this big of whatever hobby that you want. And so once when I was traveling, I don't think I finished my story, but as part of my training, I was traveling to Russia a lot. And I decided on my free time just to start making miniature baskets, and Nat Plank helped me here, and other people helped me here, and it's kind of like how to make miniatures and things like that. So what I flew up is I flew up the little discs with basically the bases with the staves sticking out of them. They look like spiders that I brought up there. And this is what I ended up weaving, was a nest of baskets like this, little oval baskets. And so this was, that was my hobby when I was up there. And it was very helpful, because it was sometime, you could just relax. You felt that you were being productive and making something. And here's a photo of kind of difficult to see, but so that's me on space station, and somebody took a photo of just some of the baskets I had finished up there. Now, I couldn't put the lacquer up there. NASA, said, no, you're not going to bring, that up there to finish them. But mostly they were done up there. Yuri had a little, in Russian they call it stamp. They had a stamp, and the Russians, it's kind of different, the different cultures. So the Russian cosmonauts, it's like a business for them to fly things in space and then they sell them later. Whereas in the US, we're not allowed to do that. And so we're prevented from doing that. But Yuri still had this stamp, and it basically says MKS MKS 4 or 4 on there, and it was an official stamp that said this flew in space. And then before we left, he destroyed the stamp. So it was all about official stamps. So what he did is on each one of these, he put a little stamp on the bottom, and that said that yes, this had flown in space. Anyway, so just different cultures, what they do and believe in there. So, but the basket weaving was really, again, very psychologically very helpful to have a hobby, to relax and just not think about. You'd think, well, why would you not think about where you are every second of the day? But I don't know, it's just important when you're in that type of environment, especially an enclosed environment. Think about not seeing anybody else, only 2 other people for 6.5 months. So it does have an isolation kind of aspect to it, and the basket weaving was very helpful.